It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The Prime Minister forced to defend his commitment to net zero after reports that the government is planning to push back targets on electric cars and boilers. The BBC launches an investigation into allegations against Russell Brand as the former boss of Big Brother says nothing was brought to his attention.
We knew he had a reputation for being promiscuous and everybody knew that at the time, but that's as far as it went, as far as we knew.
Birmingham City Council accused of woeful mismanagement by the government as it makes a move to take over services. Unnecessary, inappropriate and excessive force is found to have been used on people detained at a migrant removal centre.
If this was to happen outside in the real world, I'm pretty sure there will be attempts to prosecute someone.
Protests erupt in Libya as people demand answers to the catastrophic floods which killed thousands of people. NHS consultants on strike. We look at the impact on the hospitals and patients. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. The Prime Minister has insisted tonight that he is committed to net zero by 2050 after it was reported that the government could be watering down its green policies. Sky News understands the government would push the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars back to 2035. It's currently set to come into force in 2030. It sparked anger among Tory MPs, with one telling Sky News they are seriously considering a no-confidence letter. Sky's deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
And I hereby declare that the said Steve Tuckwell is duly elected.
This, the moment Britain started down a different path on climate policy. The Uxbridge by-election in July won by the Tories because of their opposition to the ULEZ climate change scheme. A review personally by the Prime Minister, who's always worried about the costs of net zero. And now, the results due this week. A big shift in policy and softening of climate targets, likely to provoke a major reaction for and against. A leak of the plans has prompted a rare late-night statement from the Prime Minister, saying, "For too many years, politicians in governments of all stripes have not been honest about costs and trade-offs. Instead, they've taken the easy way out, saying we can have it all. We are committed to net zero by 2050 in the agreements we have made internationally, but doing so in a better, more proportionate way. No leak will stop me beginning the process of telling the country how and why we need to change." Tory backbenchers who wanted this to happen, happy.
It's a very positive step for common sense and to help the British people. And the UK has reduced its own carbon dioxide count by far more than competitor nations. And so those who want us to lead in that way, they've got what they wanted.
The plan will mean keeping net zero by 2050, but a promise families will not suffer financially. Some new gas and oil boilers after 2035, a delay to the abolition of oil boilers, and possibly the date by which all new cars must have an electric engine pushed back from 2030 to 2035. Some are worried.
There are practical reasons why we're not ready, but this also makes me very angry. Why hasn't the government made sure that we do have electric charging points distributed around the country? Why hasn't all of the legislation been put in place to drive these things to the point where we all want to drive electric vehicles? By the way, it's not only climate change. It's clean air that we want us and our children to breathe.
A speech in days and strong reactions. Labour called it a farce, while some Tories outraged at flip-flopping an unserious government. One told Sky News they were mulling a letter of no confidence. A big gamble from Rishi Sunak to revive his political fortunes. Will it work?
Well, Sam joins me now, all very controversial. Sam, the PM forced into a statement tonight about a long-term decision on net zero policies coming later this week.
That's right, Anna. And I thought we saw a flash of anger, in fact, from the Prime Minister in that statement at the leak that's revealed his controversial plan, a gamble for the Prime Minister. Now, at the heart of it, he is going to present himself as the first politician who's prepared to tell the truth on climate change, that you can't have something for nothing, that there are trade-offs that are difficult, that he will suggest have been hidden from the public to date. But he will go on to say, and we had a preview of this from the new Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho at the weekend, that he does not think that net zero targets, that climate change targets should mean that families have to pay more and that families should have to change the way that they live their lives. So immediately the Prime Minister plunged into controversy by people asking the question whether that too is an honest assessment of where we are. It's a gamble because the Prime Minister's hoping to ride the wave that led the Conservatives to win in Uxbridge, but that is far from assured. Not only will all opposition parties line up with climate change activists to denounce what the Prime Minister's doing, but there are concerns in the Tory party tonight as well, not just from those who are environmentally minded, but those who are business minded as well. They liked the certainty that the promise that only electric vehicles would be sold after 2030 provided to industry. That encouraged car manufacturers to invest in this country in recent months. They're worried that that kind of flip-flopping is exactly the thing that deters investment and deters growth. So there is a lot of concern in the Tory ranks too this evening.
Sam Coates, live there in Downing Street. Thank you. Georgina Bailey, the granddaughter of Andrew Sachs, was at the centre of a scandal involving Russell Brand in 2008. Today, she told Sky News that the decision to suspend his earnings on YouTube over allegations made against him is cancel culture. It comes as the BBC and Channel 4 removed some content with Russell Brand on their platforms, and the BBC launched a review into complaints. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
That's basically standing up on top of water. Even Jesus has only done it once.
His Playboy persona, once proudly front and centre on a number of BBC and Channel 4 shows, now both broadcasters, taking down pretty much all of Russell Brand's past appearances from their streaming services. Director General Tim Davie saying some of Brand's content is completely unacceptable now, as the corporation announces a formal investigation to try to piece together what really went on behind the scenes. Phil Edgar-Jones, who now works at Sky, oversaw Big Brother while Russell Brand was there.
There was never any sense that he'd done anything inappropriate that was brought to our attention, certainly. You know, we knew he had a reputation for being promiscuous, and everybody knew that at the time. But that was as far as it went, as far as we knew.
The BBC says it'll act quickly, promising to release an interim update within weeks. The review will look at any complaints made against Brand, what was known and what was done, as well as the claims made by one alleged victim that Brand used a BBC car to collect her from school and drop her at his home when she was only 16.
Ding ding! Seconds out. The Capitol Police, Hunter Biden's business dealings, UFOs. What's that in the sky? Nothing. Is God real?
And in a major blow to the entertainer's self-made media empire, the monetisation of his YouTube account has now been suspended. While many of the companies who have worked with Brand are clearly keen to show they take seriously the reporting of historic allegations of sexual assault and rape, vehemently denied by Brand. The BBC, of course, knew he could at times be inappropriate, having in 2008 had to deal with Saxgate, where Brand and Jonathan Ross left lewd messages on Fawlty Towers star Andrew Sachs' answering machine about Brand's relationship with his granddaughter Georgina. Speaking to Sky's Sophie Ridge.
YouTube have today stopped Russell Brand being able to make money out of his videos on YouTube.
Really?
Do you think that's a good thing? Or do you think it's cancel culture?
No, it's cancel culture because, look, Russell made a mistake when he was younger, right? And when he made his amends to me, he looked me in the eye, apologised and said, you know, he wasn't working a programme. And as an addict in recovery, I understand where he's coming from.
As for those celebrities who once went on Brand's shows, at a red carpet event for The Sun, this response from model Caprice.
It's a much different time now than it was back then. And I guess back then that was his shtick. That's what he did. He shocked and he was a little bit outlandish. Now nobody can get away with that without getting into some serious trouble.
From Brand, a figure so known for his loquacious manner, a deafening silence, as many of those who once held him up now look to cut ties and keep their distance. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
It is Europe's largest council, but now Birmingham is being taken over by government officials after it was declared itself effectively bankrupt. The leader of the council says it has apologised to the people of the city. Sky's Becky Johnson reports.
On a miserable day in Birmingham came news the city's finances may be even worse than feared, With the City Council effectively bankrupt, the government will appoint commissioners in Whitehall to clear up the mess and take over the largest local authority in Europe.
Birmingham City Council has not served the citizens of that great city as it should have. For years now, the city has suffered as the council has failed to grip underperformance. Poor leadership, weak governance, woeful mismanagement of employee relations and ineffective service delivery have harmed the city.
Those questions being put to the council's Labour leadership.
People will be wondering how this has been allowed to happen.
I've never stepped away from taking responsibility for issues, which is why I've asked for independent inquiries into some of these matters, because it's important this council doesn't mark its own homework on some of these challenges.
Do you want to apologise to people in Birmingham now?
I've been really clear about apologising to the people of this city. Indeed, I've done so on several occasions.
But the financial situation is dire. The council set a budget of almost £1 billion, but the projected black hole is expected to be £87 million, rising to £180 million in 4 years' time. One of the biggest expenses is the bill for equal pay claims at around £760 million. It'll mean big cuts to services, with people waiting to be told what will go.
It's a nightmare, absolute joke. You know what I mean? They shouldn't be doing this.
People need looking after because times are hard at the moment.
Assets could be sold off too, including the city centre library, the council's stake in Birmingham Airport, even the iconic council house.
While Birmingham braces for large-scale cuts, we're being warned that this could soon happen in other cities and towns too. The Local Government Association says there are other councils coming close to the brink and blames a shortfall in government funding.
As politicians argue over who's responsible, it's people who'll suffer the consequences. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Birmingham.
Journalists covering the aftermath of the deadly flood in Derna in Libya have been ordered to leave the city. A minister claimed that some journalists had become an impediment to the continuing rescue efforts. More than 11,300 people died and another 40,000 were displaced after 2 dams breached upstream of the city. Well, there have been a number of protests as residents voiced their anger, accusing authorities of negligence and corruption, which led to the disaster. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford was in Derna and sent this report.
It's a city synonymous with rebellion. And the people of Derna are furious and threatening revolution once more.
It's a revolution. This is where we stand here. This is the end. We're here for our city. We're here for all the people who did for nothing.
They want justice for the events which led to the catastrophic flooding which wiped out around a quarter of the city's population.
Everything is wrong about Libya. Everything is wrong. Education, health system, military, everything is wrong. Nobody is listening to the people. Nobody is listening to the people. They only listen to each other. We see reports about politics visiting Rome, visiting Paris, visiting other capital cities of Europe, spending our money. And when we tell them about the dam, all they say is, stay at home. They told us to stay at home.
And they want justice. They want somebody to pay for what's happened at the dam, for the thousands of people who died. And the result of what they say is negligence and corruption.
A popular activist led the chants demanding the entire parliament be replaced. He wants punishment for those who failed to maintain the 2 dams which burst, as well as an inquiry overseen by the international community.
What about the international community? What responsibility do they have for this?
The international community has a responsibility to take a stand over this disaster, he says. It has to take a lead on this. Virtually every resident here has suffered loss of family in the catastrophic flooding. Tempers and emotions are running high over the destruction wrought by flooding that they're convinced could have been avoided. And this is a city with a history of toppling leaders. It was amongst the first to demand an end to Colonel Gaddafi's dictatorship. A renegade Gaddafi general and his troops are now in control of East Libya, whilst a rival government runs the west. More than a decade after the NATO military campaign to end Gaddafi's reign, the country's riddled with corruption and profiteering. With many convinced the lack of investment in the dams is because public funds were misused.
We all in Libya, from the east to here, we want to know the truth, how this happened.
This protest erupted spontaneously, but will it morph into a more coordinated demand for change in Libya? It didn't take long to turn violent, with hundreds rampaging through the Derna mayor's empty home, situated in the part of the city unaffected by the flooding. They're already working through the night to rebuild collapsed roads. It'll cost billions to reconstruct this city, and what happens to any aid will be key, with Derna residents once again at the forefront of demands for leadership change. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Derna.
A former detainee of a migrant centre in the UK has told Sky News that he would expect prosecutions after a report found that people at another immigration centre were abused prior to 2017. An inquiry into Brook House removal centre near Gatwick Airport said those held there were mistreated in prison-like conditions. A warning that Sajid Chowdhury's report shows people in distress in migrant centres.
I am not living alone. At Brook House, it was out of sight, out of mind. Until hidden cameras revealed shocking abuses. Now the immigration removal centre is described as violent and entirely unsuitable. An inquiry into just 5 months of events here found 19 cases of torture, inhumane or degrading treatment. Sky News spoke to a man who was detained at Brook House.
If this was to happen outside in the real world, I'm pretty sure there will be attempts to prosecute someone. So I don't understand the difference between it happening behind closed doors.
Prosecutions aren't part of the inquiry's remit, but investigations are. And shockingly, the chair suggests 6 years after the revelations, problems haven't gone away.
I've been particularly troubled by the evidence of some of those staff who remain working at Brook House. Even amongst those who now hold senior positions, there was a lack of reflection.
G4S, which managed Brook House in 2017, apologised and said it had swiftly dismissed a number of individuals. The site is now managed by Serco, which says it's made significant improvements. The inquiry's recommendations are set out in this report, and you go through it and there's nothing that really stands out. Robust monitoring, one would assume that's nothing new. Limit on cell sharing, that's just basic stuff to prevent overcrowding. And training and awareness, and that's in terms of rules that are already in place. But the thing that underpins all of this is the inquiry's insistence that the Home Office cannot delegate its responsibility to protect detained individuals out to its contractors. The Home Office called the abuse at Brook House unacceptable. It said, "We remain committed to ensuring safety and security in all immigration removal centres." This former detained person has been held at various sites across the country.
Every detention you go on there, but you find different workers, different officers, but it's not different. Mine, you be like cheating you like an animal inside.
These human rights violations occurred when the use of immigration removal centres was on a decline. Now the government has outlined plans to increase their use. Change must surely need to be immediate. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News, at the Brook House inquiry in London.
Hospitals are preparing for the first ever joint strike by junior doctors and consultants tomorrow, which will mean a halt to most routine activity. Emergency care will be covered throughout, but bosses say patients are still at risk. Consultants have already started their strike today. They've been delivering Christmas Day levels of staffing only, while junior doctors worked as usual. Tomorrow, for the first time in NHS history, both junior doctors and consultants will strike together. Emergency care will be provided, but no elective care is likely to take place. On Thursday and Friday, there will be a full walkout of junior doctors, while consultants will work as usual. And for 3 days in October, junior doctors and consultants will strike together once more. Again, no elective care is expected. Our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, reports.
Dave Rowland has had not one, not two, but 3 appointments cancelled because of the strikes. With every missed appointment, his sleep apnea gets worse and it's affecting the rest of his life.
If you can imagine having a cold and you can't breathe, that's the way I am all the time. And I use sprays and everything else, but they don't really help because I think it's polyps that I've got. Unless I have surgery, it's not going to change. And it can get you down sometimes.
10 months of industrial action are taking their toll, not just on patients, but staff too. Every strike day ramps up long-lasting pressure right across the health system.
If the doctors are not around, it's the challenge that patients, obviously, you need a decision instantly rather than calling to get a decision made, or sometimes transferring the patients back to acute services because there's no doctor. Our doctors go to rapid response.
Health leaders say they are doing the best they can, but they warn the situation is unsustainable and patient safety is being risked.
The biggest challenge is the planning and ensuring patient safety and try to avoid patient harm, both short-term and long-term.
But striking doctors insist patient safety is not being compromised, with Christmas Day-style rotas in place to ensure minimum staffing levels.
We are providing cover that's essential, so all emergencies will be treated. But, we need to get to a position where our services are restored. We would all walk back into our hospital now if negotiations were recommenced and a proper offer was made. We do not want to be here.
As damaging as these strikes are, the worst is yet to come. The NHS is bracing itself for unprecedented action by consultants and junior doctors when they walk out together.
The disruption is cumulative, and we've already seen over 850,000 appointments rescheduled or cancelled, and we will see many more, unfortunately, as a result of further strike action.
Consultants and junior doctors could strike all the way through another crippling winter. And for patients like Dave, that means potentially months of more misery. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
There's a long-standing convention in Anglo-French relations. The leader of the opposition does not meet the French president. A visit by Sir Keir Starmer to the Elysée put paid to that today. The Labour leader held talks with Monsieur Macron in Paris to discuss what the UK's relationship with the EU would look like should they win the next election. Our political correspondent Ali Fortescue reports.
Arriving in Paris, the man who wants to be the next Prime Minister. Keir Starmer enjoying a French business breakfast before the main event. A meeting behind closed doors with President Macron. No press allowed, just 2 photos released to prove it happened. This is a Keir Starmer Labour want you to see.
Do you think the French president wants to get to know you privately, not publicly?
We had a very constructive and positive meeting, which, as you can imagine, covered a wide range of issues, and to discuss ideas about how we would improve the relationship between our two countries, and for me to put on the table my ideas if we're privileged enough to win the election.
The French side keen not to endorse an opposition leader, but it seems the meeting went well.
This was a 45-minute one-on-one meeting. That is rare for the French president. And gifts were exchanged. From the Labour leader, there was an Arsenal shirt, and from President Macron, some cufflinks. There's no doubt it's a good look for the man who wants to be the next Prime Minister. The bigger question, though, and the bigger challenge will be when it comes to his foreign policy.
And on policy, Keir Starmer has been bolder, opening himself up to attacks over claims he could secure a better Brexit deal, and a government keen to paint him as a Europhile.
Do you think Paris thinks that Keir Starmer could be more open to a close relationship with Europe?
I think that in French eyes, the fact that he didn't vote for Brexit definitely, counts for something. Particularly when it comes to defence and security, that sort of strategic culture the British have is missing. So I think that a structured dialogue, Keir Starmer's put that on the table, that kind of thing is very valuable, could be very valuable for the French.
An entente cordiale is one thing, but it's the view at home that matters.
I would do a much better job.
In places like West Yorkshire.
Well, he's probably trying to cement a bit of future for himself, but no, it's not his place at the moment.
I think that there are opportunities for improving. There are opportunities, for new deals, new negotiations. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to stay directly away from Brexit, but there are ways that we can improve it.
President Macron's not the first world leader Keir Starmer has courted, and he's not the first opposition leader to do so. Tony Blair famously got on with Bill Clinton before entering number 10. David Cameron met with President Obama. But it's a sign that Paris are looking ahead at the man who could well be the next Prime Minister. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Paris.
Azerbaijan has begun targeting Armenian military positions in what it is calling an anti-terrorist operation. The attacks have happened against the ethnic Armenian enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan says it will only stop if local forces there surrender. Sky's Diana Magnay has this story.
If ever there was a place that the world forgot, it is this small mountainous patch of land called Nagorno-Karabakh, populated in large part by ethnic Armenians, technically part of Azerbaijan, and now under attack once again. The sound of artillery ringing through the night sky, very close to the Armenian city of Stepanakert. Azerbaijan says it is not targeting civilian infrastructure, but this is what Stepanakert's main street looks like now. Residential buildings trashed, and the hospitals beginning to fill.
We were near the hill when explosions started. We managed to survive. My sister and I survived.
Azerbaijan is calling this an anti-terror operation after 4 of its soldiers and 2 civilians died in landmine explosions in Nagorno-Karabakh early Tuesday morning. On the streets of the capital Baku, no lessening of this decades-old hostility.
This operation was long overdue. It's impossible to talk to terrorists in any other language. Our state is carrying out the necessary response.
In the Armenian capital of Yerevan, protests against Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan for what many here believe is his failure to protect the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia's ambassador to the UK telling Sky News the international community must do more.
This is not a domestic issue for Azerbaijan. This is when the rights of an entire people are brutally violated.
For 9 months now, the road between Armenia and the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh has been blocked by Azerbaijan. Food and basic humanitarian goods not getting through. People high in the mountains without enough food, fuel or medicines. And now they are facing this. This is where they hide for the night. We have just these photos, but they give you a flavour. Diana Magnay, Sky News.
The former UKIP leader Nigel Farage has hit out at a report which looked into whether there's been evidence of banks denying access to accounts for political reasons, calling it a joke. The Financial Conduct Authority said data submitted by banks between July last year and June of this year found no evidence, but admitted it needs to do more to address gaps in the data. Ivor Bennett has more.
It's not exactly debunked the so-called debanking row. Nigel Farage versus Coutts is now him against the entire industry after the regulator found no evidence banks were closing accounts due to customers' political views.
They've made themselves look absolutely ridiculous. I can give you a list as long as your arm of people who've been debanked, Brexiteers, others, Conservative members of Parliament. It's absolutely farcical, and it looks like the establishment clubbing together to protect itself.
The inquiry was launched last month after Coutts decided to close the former UKIP leader's account. He claimed it was because of his political views.
We don't want this. We want our British passports back.
That's after a dossier he obtained suggested Coutts was worried about his values and its reputational risk. But the regulator's review didn't look at his case, covering only the 12 months to June.
We have not identified any closures that have actually happened on the basis of lawfully held political views. What I'm also saying, though, is in this category of closures because of reputational risk, we need to do some further work.
But this issue goes well beyond Nigel Farage. More than 1 million adults in the UK don't have a bank account. And the regulator doesn't know why.
The universal right to a bank account doesn't actually exist in the UK, neither for individuals nor businesses. And banks can decide whether or not to provide an account based on commercial and risk reasons, so they can protect themselves from financial crime. The question is, can that power also be abused?
Yes, according to this former customer of the Yorkshire Building Society, who says his account was closed after he suggested they concentrate more on banking than supporting Pride Month.
It's just a clear example of really an institution getting involved in politics or in a social engineering in a way which they shouldn't. You know, that's not their remit. They're a bank. They're given a banking license to manage money.
But this has become an increasingly political issue in which some feel our fundamental freedom of speech is at stake. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, joined, as you can see tonight, by the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Welcome to both of you. And among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Metro, their headline, Toxic Brand. More on that story and, of course, the rest of the day's news in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. The Prime Minister has been forced to defend his commitment to net zero by 2050 after reports that the government is planning to push back targets on electric cars and gas boilers. The BBC has launched an investigation into allegations against Russell Brand as the former boss of Big Brother says nothing was brought to his attention. And Birmingham City Council has been accused of woeful mismanagement by the government as it makes a move to take over services. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the journalist, author and broadcaster, I've just added that, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome and great to see both of you. As ever, we crack on with the front pages. The government's shift on net zero pledges makes the front of tomorrow's Express, which looks ahead to the Prime Minister's speech on Friday. Same story on the front of the Daily Mail, which hails the change on net zero plans as common sense, also asking if this is the moment the Prime Minister turns the tide. The Guardian says the policy will see the Conservatives attempting to create a dividing line with Labour ahead of the next election. Meanwhile, toxic brand is the Metro's headline, remarking on the latest developments in the Russell Brand controversy as YouTube demonetises his videos and the BBC and Channel 4 remove his content from their platforms. He continues to deny any wrongdoing. The Eye says the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will reject the European Union's master plan and is not interested in the UK rejoining a revamped EU. The Birmingham Post calls the city's local government the Council of Despair after the Community Secretary Michael Gove appointed administrators to run it because it has effectively declared itself bankrupt. The Mirror leads on the Education Secretary Gillian Keegan's comments about RAC in schools and the suggestion that children enjoy studying in Portakabin classrooms. And finally, the Daily Star has a more humorous take on the same story. I think you read that one for yourself, don't you? Now then, don't forget to scan the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, and you can check out the front pages for yourself of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Ali and Jenny. Right. Kick off with net zero. PM forced into a statement tonight after what he called leaks. Big speech coming up later this week, Ali.
That's right, and this is all to do with net zero, Anna, and there are a few elements to it. We believe that the Prime Minister, or at least it's being reported that the Prime Minister is going to be looking at pushing back this phasing out of diesel and petrol cars from 2030 to 2035. Also, reducing the requirement for all gas boilers to be phased out by 2035, probably maybe only 80% of them, and also reducing energy efficiency measures required by private rented sector landlords. Now, why are they doing this? Because basically they're 18 to 20 points behind in the polls. They're absolutely thinking, what on earth are we going to do to try and pull anything back? I mean, the reality is that this is all about minimising the defeat, not winning an election. And they're going to try and come up with something. And they're driven by the fact that in the Uxbridge and South Russell by-election, they managed to squeak in and hold that seat by 495 votes. So this is the great panacea that they've been searching for.
So you're saying, so I'm going to read the quote from Rishi Sunak's statement tonight. Our politics must again put the long-term interests of our country before the short-term political needs of the moment. You're suggesting the short-term political needs are dictating the long-term demands of this nation.
I have to say, I think that quote from Sunak is kind of Kafkaesque, because this is the short-term thinking of somebody who really believes they're going to be losing the next general election, desperately scrabbling around of, oh, people like this, people liked it in Uxbridge when we went back against ULEZ. It takes us for fools here. We need long-term strategic thinking. We need long-term plans. And the idea that the government is still committed to net zero and yet is going to push back these targets, not just on banning diesel and petrol cars by 2035 instead of 2030. It's also to do with gas boilers. It's also no taxes on flying or on food choices, a whole variety of things that were leaked today. How are we going to fulfil our net zero commitments without those things or other big, bold plans? And what's interesting about this is this does create a clear dividing line between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. at the time of the next election, because Labour have promised to invest billions in green policies. And this sounds
they
like...
rode back too.
They did.
They have rode back to an extent, but then, you know, nobody is suggesting anything like this. This is playing into the hands of a particular constituency of people who perhaps haven't been supported very well when it comes to things like ULEZ. It hasn't been implemented very well. But, you know...
Or is it playing into the fact that people feel poor?
Well, I think so. And the thing is, I agree with Jenny to a certain extent, but Sunak would argue, the Prime Minister would argue, that you've got to take people with you. And in the middle of a cost of living crisis, the question is, which no one wants to answer, is who pays for all this? That's the thing.
Well, in a cost of living crisis, if you've got to take people with you, the government could do more to support people in, for example, having electric cars.
The government's on £2.5 trillion of
the government's paying £8 million a day to put people up in hotels because of the backlog. And, you know, the whole point is Rishi Sunak doesn't really care about green policies. He didn't want to go to COP27. He only went because Boris Johnson was going to go there and show him up. He's never shown an interest in this stuff.
He's not gone to the UN General Assembly right now either, has he?
He's not. It's not a priority for him.
Let's take a look at The Guardian then, shall we? Because the question is who's going to like this decision when it comes later this week. And The Guardian says there's Tory dismay as the PM seeks to soften net zero pledges. Which young people are going to vote Tory, Ali, after decisions like this?
Well, I do think that there is a problem for the Tories generally with younger voters anyway, not only on the...
So we write them off, do we?
Well, on the environmental
They talk
issue,
to their parents.
Indeed, and parents are also very concerned about this, and I do think that this is a danger here for the Tory party in terms of how they're handling this issue. I mean, Chris Skidmore, who wrote a report into net zero, is actually saying, and quoted here, saying that we will look back on this moment as Sunak's slow-motion car crash. And it reminds me what Jenny just said there about the short-term thinking here reminds me of what Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, said in a speech in 2015. He lamented the tragedy of the horizon when it comes to policymakers taking a long-term view. They never look beyond 4 or 5 years to the next election. Yes. And this Guardian piece is talking about the measures that could potentially be kicking the can down the road yet again. I do understand, though. I do understand that people are going to be... This is going to be costly for people, and the government just simply doesn't have any cash. That's the problem. Yeah. So I do understand that.
But then you look what is happening in America with Biden's massive investment programmes in green energy, the European Union hinting it will also match it. And in fact, Grant Shapps, when he was in charge, whatever department that was, suggested the UK would do the same.
We're absolutely nowhere on it. We're nowhere on it.
Yes, and The Guardian says, you know, he quotes a senior Tory who says this would be the greatest mistake of Sunak's premiership and that watering down the targets could cost jobs, put up energy bills and damage the UK's international reputation. So this is incredibly short-term thinking. It's myopic. It is, as you say, based on this clinging on to the fact that, oh, we won in Oxbridge is pathetic, really.
Well, just over a week ago, the suggestion was that £75 million of government money was going towards BMW to help them electrify their car fleet. And there had been promises made to the car makers that the net zero promise on new diesel and petrol cars after 2030 being banned would stick. Because otherwise, why are they putting money into it? So what's happened with those supposed promises made to car makers?
Well, that's the thing. And one of the things that is being said here very clearly by the private sector is, and this is actually quoting various business groups, and one came out of me saying, I just came out of a meeting where a chunk of the British economy was assured by ministers that net zero was a top priority, and now it isn't. So if you're an investor, investors want security. They want to know the direction of travel from a government. And also the government has a real key role as an enabler to crowd in private capital. They're not going to crowd in private capital if they don't know from one day to the next what the policy is. And the government doesn't need to spend all the money itself, but what it can do is provide some subsidy for electric vehicle charging, for example, to get in private money.
And the whole point is if you have a deadline, then businesses will invest in the need for charging, for example. Daily Mail, let's take a look at the opposite side from The Guardian, shall we? Finally, common sense on net zero. Is this the moment Rishi turned the tide or turned him... I don't understand that. Turned himself, who knows? Anyway, the point is that they are approving of it. Is that it, Ali?
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who will always oppose anything to net zero, that think it's a kind of bonkers plan, and particularly there is a sense that there is some people feel that car owners are under siege. But I would say, again, that this is to do with poor implementation of these schemes. This is to do with scrappage schemes not being properly sorted out. There not being enough chargers. There not being enough subsidies for the kinds of cars that we are being nudged towards. But you know, there are a lot of people who will think that he will agree with this. The fact is, we know there was a report out today from climate researchers saying that the storms that happened in Libya that have resulted in the deaths of thousands of people were 50 times more likely because of man-made climate change. We have to do something. We have signed up to international agreements here. If it's not going to be the 2030 petrol car ban, what else is it going to be for us to get to net zero? Because we have to do something.
OK. Yeah, he talked about heading to net zero by 2050. Remember, this is net zero by 2050. He's not talking about 2030s. In a more proportionate way. The Daily Mail talks about a more pragmatic approach. The Times is just in. It would take a lot to boot off Russell Brand, I guess, from their front page. But there it is. Sunak set for retreat on climate promises. The deadline for gas boil is expected to be ditched as petrol and diesel car sales continue until 2035. So that's 5 years. Now, some might say, why would 5 years make any difference when we have massively reduced our CO2 output compared to other nations around the world? And people look at nations like China or India or many others who are not doing as much.
Well, Narendra Modi was very, very clear at the G20 that, look, don't put it all on India. I mean, it's our time to industrialise. You had your time. This is ours. So that is not going to be an easy conversation to have at all. And developing countries, less developed countries, are also talking about loss and damage. So all of these things are complex. But if we want to be leading by example, then we should be doing our bit. However, I do believe that things like ULEZ and these things were brought in insensitively in outer London at a time when people are suffering, and I think it could have been done in a much better way. You do need to bring people on this journey with you. So I do have some sympathy with the PM, but I still don't think that this myopic approach to life is actually going to help us in the long term.
And, you know, we can't have it both ways. Either we are a big voice on the global stage and we matter, or we're not. And you can't go around saying, well, we're not doing it if China and India are not doing it. We have to lead by example. As one of the wealthier countries, we have to lead by example. And that is a question of political will.
Which industrialise first?
Yeah. Well, yes, I think the climate change news this week is the Antarctic ice sheets, isn't it? It's the very latest, well, effectively horror show. Just quickly, there is the Times on Russell Brand, the Times, Sunday Times, Channel 4's Dispatch is leading the way on this. The BBC's Director General has said that the corporation broadcasts completely unacceptable material from Russell Brand. Let's move on then to the other coverage. It's the lead again for Metro, toxic brand, deplatforming, loss of business. There's the inside pages as well. So, you know, what are we beginning to see? That, you know, the world for him is shrinking in terms of
yes, and for a man who is so loquacious and outspoken, there has been so much silence. The idea that he is being shut off platforms is very interesting. I mean, there are different things going on here. It must be said that YouTube is still hosting Russell Brand's content. It's just not allowing him to make money off them. And this is a commercial decision. You know, there was a big scandal, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago when HSBC and other brands were putting adverts on YouTube videos of far-right extremists. They don't want to alienate their advertisers. That's why they've demonetised his account. It's not over any moral high ground, but it does seem like, you know, the walls are closing in for Russell Brand.
We're running out of time. I've just seen the time. We better stop. Just one sentence.
Look, I find Russell Brand reprehensible. The allegations are very serious, but the place to determine guilt or innocence is in a court of law.
OK. We will no doubt debate that later on. Thank you very much indeed. Lots more still to come. Apparently, Sir Keir Starmer doesn't like the idea of the UK rejoining the EU as a so-called associate member. More on that in just a moment.
It was almost 4 years ago now that I first went to the doctors struggling with short-term memory, concentration. I would struggle in a group situation to take in noise of a conversation. And then I was putting it down to everyday living and stress. And I went on a bike ride that I've done lots of times from my house and got lost and had this blackout moment and came back pretty shook up, and from there went to my doctors, and that's where the testing started almost 4 years ago. Well, we just weren't educated on concussion. I'd never heard of subconcussion, which is every impact is causing a small bit of damage. And we were doing, rugby had only just turned professional. In '95, I'd signed my first contract, and we were doing so much contact during the week leading up to a game. It was ridiculous. It wasn't policed. When you had a a concussion and you were feeling a bit dazed, you just had sniffing salts, and you were expected to carry on. It's a tough one. I think the age of which they start contact at the moment is too young. It's 9. I started when I was 4, and contact was allowed at 4. So 9 is obviously better than 4. But for me, I think we've got to look at the age of maybe 14 to start introducing contact to 16, it being a full game that would give the brain time to develop at that young age. And it will be a lot safer then going forward. All the changes we want to make, I say all, 95% of the changes we want to make rugby safer, because I still love rugby. I'm cycling to Lyon to watch the game on Sunday, is off the pitch. So when there is a traumatic brain injury, a concussion, a player doesn't return in 7 days. In boxing, it's 6 to 8 weeks, but a rugby player can return and play in 7 days. We want that increased to 28 days. Also, the amount of contact players do in training, we want that policed like the NFL did 15 years ago. At the moment, there's guidelines, and I know some teams are very good at this, but it's not the same across the board.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Ali Miraj and Jenny Kleeman. Welcome back to both of you. So, Keir Starmer with the French president today, not supposed to happen, meeting the opposition leader, is it? It's led to a flurry of headlines, not least in the Eye, about what Sir Keir Starmer, or how Sir Keir Starmer would position the UK should he win the next election in relation to the European Union, including this idea of a master plan of sort of tiered membership, effectively, Jenny.
Yes, there's an idea that there might be a kind of inner circle with different layers. It all sounds rather complicated and mysterious, and that the UK could be involved somehow in an outer tier, in a third tier of the EU as a kind of partner. And this is the kind of talk that is a bit dangerous to have around Keir Starmer if you're a Labour Party strategist, because what you don't want is for people to suggest that you're trying to rejoin the EU or any kind of EU alliance by the back door. This is what he's rejecting it, or he's saying that he's rejecting it. However, he wants to look statesmanlike on the world stage. Going to meet the President of France helps with that. Also, there is a sense that our Brexit of taking back control has led to the small boats crisis in many ways, because we've opted out of the returns deal that would have allowed us to return migrants to Europe. We do need to have a better relationship with Europe than we have now. And so he does need to be seen to be talking to Europe. So it's a kind of very thin ice that he's standing on. He needs to be making those alliances, but they're not appearing so close as to alienate people who are worried about Brexit.
Very quickly, Ali, on this one.
Well, I mean, the French and German Europe ministers have come up with the wedding cake approach to Europe, where they've got this tiered approach. And we're going to be, apparently they're suggesting we could be in the third tier, which actually means joining up to the single market again. I can't see that happening at all, because one of the fundamental 4 freedoms is freedom of movement. And that's one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit. So I don't think that's going to work. I think Starmer knows that. He doesn't want to alienate Labour voters that voted Brexit last time. He needs them back, but he wants a more pragmatic relationship with Europe. And for those Brexiteers who are lamenting that fact, well, what on earth has happened for the better since we've left. So I think it's sensible.
Yeah, quick 30 seconds, if you don't mind, on the Birmingham Post, the Council of Despair, not surprising after today.
Yes, 2 weeks ago, it said it went past. Michael Gove was talking about how the Commission is going to move in and take over. But, you know, there are many different councils who are also on the verge of declaring themselves effectively bust. The government says it's to do with poor leadership. The council say it's to do with 15 years of cuts. We'll see what happens. It's very upsetting. Birmingham might have to sell off its library.
Well, more like also a massive 1.1 billion liability they've already paid and another 750-odd million in relation to not paying female workers the same as men. Yeah. I mean, how on earth could you get that so badly wrong? Bizarre.
Ali, Jenny, thank you. We need a longer programme. Luckily, we've got one. It's called The 11. We'll see you then. Thank you very much indeed. To the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the unsettled conditions this week means it'll be often windy with showers or longer spells of rain. Most places will have a warm and windy start to Wednesday. Outbreaks of heavy rain across the north and west of Britain. England and Wales will see strong winds and heavy rain moving eastward through the morning, but the extreme southeast should stay fine. Showery conditions will follow to the northwest. Elsewhere, a mix of sunny spells, blustery showers, some heavy, perhaps thundery, and it will be a touch warmer overall.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So more from our guests in Sky News at 11. The Prime Minister says he needs to put long-term interests of the country first after reports he's going to water down green policies later this week.